Nobody is buying a house, whether it's a mobile home or a $6 million lakefront property, because there's granite countertops. They're buying it because what's going to happen in that kitchen where the granite countertops are, right? I can't tell you how many times over the last decade I've sat with a buyer and they've told me, this is my list. It has to be what's on this list. If it's not on this list, don't show me the house. I don't want to have anything to do with anything that's not on this list. And then the house we buy has absolutely nothing to do with that list, right? That mindset is really the key, and that there absolutely is hope. There's an ability to fight another day. And the funny thing was, as soon as I did that, the rewards were greater than when I didn't put somebody else first. It's a really weird magic trick that the moment you come from a place of service, right, and come from a less kind of narcissistic view of the world, the rewards and the riches show up.
David Christensen joins me here today, and you can find what he's up to. Head over to davidchristensen.com.
We're happy to be here.
So, David, I was going through a lot of the information that was sent over and trying to do a little research on my own, and you really have quite the journey. We talk about real estate being kind of an accidental occupation, but I don't know if you could have a more winding road than what I saw you went through.
That's probably pretty accurate. We have taken the Wizard of Oz path to real estate for sure.
You're currently top luxury real estate agent in your area,
Sure, sure.
but before that, you were managing platinum selling musicians. How did you find your way into real estate with this type of background? And what type of skills did you learn from those industries that you've been able to leverage?
Sure. Great question. I started out as a small town kid in a small town here in New Hampshire, and had dreams of being a rock star, and so that led me to heading out to LA when I was a young man. And I decided I was probably better suited for the business side of things. And so that really started a 10 to 15-year career in the music business. So I worked for management companies. I had my own management company, worked for Warner Brothers Records, and really just took my love of music and my newfound understanding of negotiation and storytelling and all that kind of stuff, and really packaged that into what we were very blessed to have as a very successful music career. And, I always say to people when they're talking about life transitions or things that they're looking to do, that it's really not about the job itself. It's about the skill set and those skill sets that you learn while doing one job or another. And for me, being in the music industry, it was a skill set of really trying to understand what that artist needed, what the audience was looking for, and then how to craft a narrative that connected those two dots. And if you think about how real estate works, it's very simple, at least for me in residential real estate and certainly in luxury real estate. We're trying to tell a story. We're trying to share why this particular property has some special nuance to it, something that's interesting to the buyer. And so all that expertise in terms of storytelling from a creative perspective in the music industry really overlaid very nicely into real estate. So that was kind of the backstory in terms of what skill sets worked for me here in luxury real estate. Obviously, the journey is much longer, but that's kind of a nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah. Well, you've had some pretty significant highs, but some lows as well. And you're pretty open about your through recovery and a few things there. But could you talk a little bit about working through that? And I mean, since this is a real estate investing show, like what did real estate and how did you leverage that during those times when you
Sure.
were rebuilding your life?
Yeah, great question. I think you and I may have talked about a little bit via email. Mindset is key for anything that we're doing, whether it's real estate investing or sales or just life in general. And for me, I got everything I ever dreamed of as a small town kid. Every fantasy that I ever had about moving to the big city and having some of those big experiences came true. And I had a decade plus of every bell and whistle that you could hope for. And what that led me to understand is that wasn't fulfilling for me. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of us find that, right? Some of us find it earlier in our lives, and some of us find that later in our lives, that thing that we thought was going to fulfill us, whether it's real estate investing or it's a career that we have or a family. we sometimes wind up at that crossroad. And certainly for me, I was in Los Angeles and everything was phenomenal on paper, and I just felt really empty. My way of solving that emptiness was alcohol, and it just didn't work for me. And so, as you alluded to, I had a journey that got very dark there for a while. That classic story of being on the top of the mountain, realizing that it's not all it's cracked up to be, turning to something that you think is going to solve the problem, and it doesn't. And so, I lost everything and had to go through this rebuilding period. And that rebuilding period included that trip to Titanic and some of that work. But it really, more than anything, required me to look at what was important in my life. And as soon as I kind of had that mental shift, that everything else was a bell and whistle, but at the end of the day, family, friends, authenticity, giving back, being of service, all of those things were the things that I was missing. Once I got clarity on that, when I shifted over to real estate, I think my career exploded because my North Star was much more centered than when I was a young man. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. You know, when we're dealing with anything, I've talked about it, like when we've been doing the real estate investing, there's been some rough moments just professionally, and it feels like your compass is just completely off and that you don't even start to trust your own decision making.
Absolutely. And I think too, especially in real estate investing, that if emotion gets too intertwined in that, it's very difficult to make a solid nuts and bolts decision, right? Investing really comes down to the numbers. And I think while there has to be a guttural instinct, and I think all of us that are successful have some level of guttural instinct, it does really come down to, do the numbers make sense? And I think sometimes when we don't have that right guiding star, or we don't have a thought process of what's important to us when we're investing, those emotions can really kind of derail us quicker than we'd like.
Would you mind talking? Going back to you mentioned storytelling. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I actually think it's kind of funny, especially in the real estate investing world, and looking back on some things now regarding our marketing and some of the things that we did. It seems like a lot of the marketing that we were doing was based on attracting other investors or how to do this type of thing, instead of the audience of trying to cater to maybe distressed homeowners or talking about the story about the property. You know, the people that we're trying to attract, that wasn't the material that we were creating. It was, and you mentioned storytelling as a big aspect of it. Is that a big blind spot in realtors as well as investors? I think there's something to be learned there.
Sure, I think there is. And it certainly took me time to learn it. I think sometimes we can get too tricky for our own good, right? When we get to become experts in our specific field, we know a lot more than that average consumer does, right? And so sometimes we can be a little bit too heady in our approach and how we're talking to things. And I see it all the time in residential real estate. We start talking about the details of something as opposed to the feeling of something. Nobody is buying a house, whether it's a mobile home or a $6 million lakefront property, because there's granite countertops. They're buying it because what's going to happen in that kitchen where the granite countertops are, right? And so I really try to remind myself that I'm selling the feeling. I'm trying to get somebody to understand what problem it's going to solve for them, what emotion it's going to give them. And yes, technically there may be a granite countertop, or technically there may be a view, but I try to rewind that a little bit and go, what is it, the feeling that I want them to have? And I think all good marketing at some degree has got that as a real part of the focus.
Hmm. That's really interesting, especially when you take a look at, you know, we joke because we've seen it so often where a couple will drive up to a house and sometimes that they won't even get out of the car because
Ooh.
it doesn't feel right. It's like they won't even walk through the front door because something is off.
It's funny. I joke with buyers all the time. I can't tell you how many times over the last decade I've sat with a buyer and they've told me, this is my list. It has to be what's on this list. If it's not on this list, don't show me the house. I don't want to have anything to do with anything that's not on this list. And then the house we buy has absolutely nothing to do with that list, right? Because it wasn't the list that they wanted. It was the feeling that they thought the list was going to give them, right? They thought if they had these
Right.
11 things, all would be right with the world. And so they kind of put these bumpers on what they were looking at. And then all of a sudden they saw something that didn't resonate with the list, but it actually gave them the feeling that they hoped the list was going to give them. And so one of the things I try to do, because it's a sweet spot you're trying to find, because you don't want your client is dictating, hey, this is the parameters of what I'm thinking. And if you off the bat start throwing things into the mix that are markedly outside that, that trust tends to not lock in. However, if you do build a really good rhythm and that they do understand that you're trying to understand that feeling, and you start introducing some things that you think might solve that problem that not on the list, then they're a little bit more open to it than they might have been kind of in that first meeting or so. And it's so funny, because like I said, I've had multiple experiences where we're at the closing table and, I framed the list that my buyer had given me of the absolute must haves and will not accept. And the house that they got was nothing like that. And we've been friends for 5+ years now, and they love the house that they're in.
Hmm. Well, I mean, this has got to be a completely different conversation that you're having with these individuals, or how do you uncover what what they mean by some of this then, regarding their feeling or what you're trying to establish, or you're getting kind of it reminds me of some of the conversations I have with distressed homeowners, because more times than not, understanding their feelings and the stress is far more productive conversation than when I'm trying to talk about details of the property itself.
You nailed it. The quicker that we can get authentically to that place of finding out what's behind that list, the better off we are, right? I think a lot of times in real estate, we're trying to be so efficient, or we're trying to show our worth so quickly that we forget what the nugget is that we're trying to find, right? And there's a lot of skilled real estate agents out there, not taking anything away from them, but they can get so caught up in the protocol and the rhythm of it that they don't ask those very key questions, or they don't provide a scenario where that buyer feels comfortable to be more open. So my number one goal when I met a client is to, as quickly and as authentically as possible, build that rapport so that they know that they're in a safe place, that my goal is to help them regardless of how that journey plays itself out, that I'm not on a timetable, whether it takes us 3 days to find a house or it takes us 3 years, they're in a safe place. Once they do that, it's dramatic. You can see the breath kind of just come off and the shoulders relax. And now they go, okay, I've got a partner with me to navigate this, as opposed to somebody who's inherently trying to sell me. And that to me is the secret sauce.
Well, it's hard to not see this, as a realtor and an investor. It's hard to not fall into that this is another transaction. But on the other side, we have to be willing to recognize the fact that most people only buy a house or two in their lifetime. It's not a normal transaction for most people.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, the commercial real estate space is entirely different. But in the residential real estate space, almost every transaction is tied to a life moment, right? We've either just gotten married, or we've gotten divorced, or we've gotten transferred across the state. And we've got kids that are now going to be anxious because they're going to a new school. And the wife is nervous about, am I going to meet friends? And there's always this emotional component to it that's very different than strict investing or commercial. And I think if you don't take that into consideration, can be a real speed bump. I always try to tell agents that I work with or mentor, you can't, in my humble opinion, you can't look at it as a transaction or a one-off. It has to be looked at differently. If you're ever thinking about the commission, or you're thinking about the time invested, you're just going to set yourself up for failure. When we talk about agents that have withstood the test of time and that have gone through ups and downs of their career and withstood bad markets and good markets, it's because ultimately they've built trust with those clients, right? And those clients look at them like the go-to attorney or the go-to doctor. They don't look at it as a one-off, right? So even though they may only do 3 transactions in their lifetime, they're referring you to the husband, the neighbor, the kids, the school teacher that they know. And I think that all comes from building that trust in that early transaction.
Well, we got to talk about the elephant in the room regarding the Breaking Bad house. I'm sure people are curious about that. Sure, quite a bit of buzz when you got that house and you listing it, and there was some storytelling associated with that as well. I mean,
Sure,
it had to have been like the number one show at one point, and
it
then now
was.
you have the house that you're trying to list as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you leveraged the storytelling?
Absolutely. So, we were super grateful to get that listing. Again, that came from, 15 plus years in the entertainment industry. One of those relationships happened to live in Albuquerque and be friends with those owners. And so that's how that came together. And I think the main difference about that particular project that we're knee deep in right now is we knew from the get go that we couldn't look at this as a 4-bedroom ranch in a small Albuquerque neighborhood, because if that were the case, the house is worth $400,000. It's a beautiful little starter home ranch. Really, the story is the iconic representation that that house has. I mean, you mentioned that that show was number one of the most Emmy nominated shows in history, one of the largest, premieres and final episodes ever seen. So I think it just had a cultural impact far beyond the house itself. What's really interesting, a lot of people don't know this, it gets up to 300 cars a day to this day driving by that home. And so I've been out there numerous times for meetings, and you literally can just sit in the living room and watch the cars go by and people take their pictures. And so our entire presentation was we wanted to speak to a very specific audience. And the audience was an investor that understood that an Airbnb or a museum scenario was going to make it worth the price that we were asking for it. And so that's really what we've done. We're in conversations with two investors now, and we've got the city of Albuquerque very open to granting some variances so that we can take what's a residential neighborhood and get some variances to do this Airbnb slash museum, which we're excited about.
Just to remind everybody, we're talking to David Christensen, and you can learn more at davidchristensen.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, this show only grows if you share it with an investor friend. So please consider doing that. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe. So, David, one of the statistics I saw regarding you was a bit overwhelming. You've sold over 400 homes, and you work to becoming a nationally recognized agent. Could you talk to our audience about how often, we're all juggling wholesaling deals and talking to distressed homeowners and dealing with all of this stuff? Do you have any quick advice or a single piece of advice you'd offer for in closing more deals?
Sure. I think organization and systems is key. I think I struggled my first couple years out of the gate as a new real estate agent to figure out, how do I keep this workflow going? How do I keep the communication going? Being specific about how those systems work, how those CRMs work was critical. I think also delegation, and that was a real hard thing for me early on. I'm a little bit of a control freak and a perfectionist, and so it was hard in that early time frame to let things go. And I think as I've got further along in my career and I figured out what works and what doesn't, bringing on key people that can help us behind the scenes has been mission critical. I pride myself in those 400 homes were all sold by me. I haven't, kind of dispersed it to multiple people, but I have a great team of people that help us move that process along in a way that keeps it fluent and smooth.
Well, you also have a very unique ability to blend your analytical side and your creativity side. Is there anything that we should be considering doing to kind of stand out in our own marketplace? And
Sure. It's funny. I was having a conversation before this podcast about the growth of AI and what that's going to mean. And I think a lot of us are really excited about those tools right now that everybody has access to that stuff. So we can very quickly utilize that. But I think what separates people is authenticity and trust. And I think even more so now, when everybody's going to have access to these tools, the more that we can focus on, am I building an authentic relationship? Is this ad that I'm putting out authentic to me? Like you said earlier, am I speaking to the need or the feeling and not necessarily to the technical component, right? Am I really understanding what is it that this buyer or seller is trying to achieve, and maybe not getting too smart for our own good, right? These emotions that make us tick are fairly common against all price points in all parts of the country, right? We're all, as humans, trying to kind of solve the same types of problems. And I think anything that you can do that keeps it focused on those things, I think is really the differentiator.
You're kind of hitting the nail on the head when it comes to this. I help people all the time adopt AI and automations in their real estate investing business so that they can scale without hiring more people. But I feel like I get a little preachy regarding this though, in the fact that I think a lot of people, especially initially, are using this as like everything's a nail right now, and AI is the hammer. We're going to patch everything with this. And we should really be seeing this as helping us. We're putting on our Iron Man suit. There's still
Yeah.
somebody in the middle, but we
Yes.
got to see it as tools and maybe help with some productivity, but to help you shine as a creative or an individual.
You just nailed it. I came back from a conference last week and there was a whole section on AI. And that's what he kept trying to instill in us is that it's not going to make you a better agent. It's not going to be a supplement for you as a person. If you're a chaotic person, if you're not an authentic person, all it's going to do is amplify the chaos. What it needs to be used is as a tool to free you up to be a better agent, to work on those skill sets and those crafts that you would have needed prior to the implementation of AI. And I think one of the hard lessons that a lot of agents are going to learn is that anticipation that this is going to solve all my problems. And the second I start using ChatGPT or I start using some of these layovers, that all my problems are going to go away. It's really there as a tool and an asset. I love that idea of it being like the Iron Man suit. At the end of the day, Tony Stark is still going to have his act together and figure out what he's doing. And this is just a beautiful asset for him to use.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm always been curious about too, David, is that as you've gotten as big as you are doing 400 plus houses at this point, scaling had to be a bit of a challenge, at least in some spots. Can you talk a little bit about any of those scaling challenges and how you work through them?
Absolutely. I talk a lot about 2021. I have the privilege and blessing of selling, I think, 65 houses that year by myself. And at that point, I didn't have a lot of the systems in place. And it was just the sheer chaos, right? At the end of the day, clients got a good result and we sold a lot of houses, but it was painful process. And in that process, it really brought me to that place of kind of stripping it back and realizing, okay, what things could be more organized? What things could we delegate? And so one of the things that I always come back to is we talk about this feeling that we talked about at the beginning, right? At the end of the day, the client doesn't necessarily want access to me. The client wants access to the feeling that my company gives that I've inspired by the way we've put our systems in place, right? And so what I've tried to do over the last 3 or 4 years, I'm involved in the important parts of that transaction that keep it in tow online and that utilize my skill sets, right? And so I would say to anybody is really look at your daily activities and go, are there activities here that are taking my strengths away from the area that I really am great at that I could delegate? The other lesson that I learned, and a coach told me this, and I recommend this to anybody, is do a time accountability. Take 1 week and really grab yourself a notepad. It can be super simple, chicken scratch, and write down every 15, 30 minutes, what are you doing in the course of a week? And even the most productive people on the planet will be shocked at the end of that week where they really see kind of where there's time going. And it's amazing because there's some very black and white things that'll jump out at you in terms of how you're structuring your day, areas where you might be having this speed bump, right? And so, a lot of times we can't improve, we can't get better unless we're doing kind of an internal audit or accountability. And that was super helpful for me.
Yeah, that's an interesting strategy. That's one of the things that we were talking about building that Iron Man suit. I helped somebody recently with a couple small projects, and then he called me a little while later saying that the AI processes that we put into place he just didn't need them doing that type of work anymore.
Sure, sure. And again, a lot of times because we get so busy and we confuse working hard and fast as necessarily working smoothly, right? And sometimes when we take that moment to do that audit, we see these gaps right away where we could be much more efficient. And I say this all the time too. It's not always of selling more houses, right? That audit of how to work smoother and with more space and less chaos isn't necessarily so you can shove 10 more transactions into the mix. But think about, especially in the real estate business, we are so unbalanced in terms of our life work balance that one of the main things for me was not, can I sell another 20 homes this year? But could I sell the same amount of homes, but have more time with my family, have more time for myself as I get older and want a little bit more peace of mind? And I think that has just as much value to a lot of people than necessarily 10 more houses.
Yeah, we always talk about financial freedom, but in the nutshell, that's really what we're striving for, right? The
Absolutely.
ability to do what we wish with our time.
That's exactly right.
This has just been such a great conversation, David.
My pleasure.
Is there something we should have tried to hit on that I might have missed?
You hit a lot of it. I mean, the one thing I would just say is that when I look at my life and on paper, there was some really, for lack of a better word, holy shit moments like, wow, this is pretty dark. And I don't know that we're going to be able to right the ship. That I would just implore anybody who's struggling or going through something like that, whether it's a sobriety issue or it's a financial issue or it's a emotional family issue, that mindset is really the key, and that there absolutely is hope. There's an ability to fight another day, and that our careers are a mechanism for that financial freedom that you talk about. But at the end of the day, it's a mechanism for us to find peace, to find times with our family, to build great memories. And I think anybody who's kind of going through that crossroads in life is to remember that there is definitely a second chapter for all of us.
I appreciate you saying that. Would you mind talking a little bit more about that in the concept of, was there anything that gave you that glimmer of hope? Like, that something that you were able to grasp onto and pull yourself out of that dark moment?
Absolutely. I mean, I have to give credit to my family. I've been sober 14 years now, and I met a phenomenal woman who had two amazing children. And that crossroads of realizing that all the bells and whistles, all the fancy stuff that I had been blessed with didn't do anything for my soul. And once I really connected with what my purpose was, it was a game changer for me. And it started that path of sobriety. It started that path of putting somebody other than myself first. And the funny thing was, as soon as I did that, the rewards were greater than when I didn't put somebody else first. It's a really weird magic trick that the moment you come from a place of service, right, and come from a less kind of narcissistic view of the world, the rewards and the riches show up, I found. And I think statistically, if you talk to a lot of people that have struggled through these kind of life changes, they'd say the same thing.
Yeah, that's just amazing, isn't it?
100%. I mean, it's the golden rule, really. If you treat somebody else the way you want it to be treated, if you look at them through that framework, life tends to treat you pretty beautifully.
Well, David, if you're ready, why don't we jump into the rapid fire and close out this episode? But this has just been a fantastic conversation. If you're ready, we'll jump into the rapid.
Yes.
What lie do real estate investors often tell themselves?
It's never too late to start. I'm a firm believer that I've met people that are 70 years old that are just kind of sharpening their skills. And so it's never too late to jump in.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Be true to yourself and know that it's all going to work out.
Do you have a book recommendation?
One of my favorite books is The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan. I recommend it to everybody. Phenomenal book.
And then finally, what single strategy or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time-saving impact?
In the last 6 months, it's been AI and utilizing it correctly, like we talked about, as an addition, as opposed to the total meat and potatoes, but it's been super helpful.
Well, David, I really appreciate it. One last time, it is davidchristensen.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. Hope you'll consider coming back again sometime.
Absolutely lovely meeting you and really enjoyed it.